Amici, buonasera, ciao Norberto, siamo qui negli uffici del sindaco Koch, il nostro straordinario ufficio situato nella città in Midtown, New York. Mayor Koch ha gentilmente accettato la richiesta di napolionline.org di essere intervistato e quindi quest'oggi sentiremo direttamente dal sindaco Koch quali sono state le ricette, le difficoltà e gli sforzi per salvare New York nella metà degli anni 70.
Okay.
Yes.
When I ran for election as mayor in 1977, I was a member of Congress. I had been in Congress for 9 years. Before that, I had been a member of the New York City Council for 2 years. So I cite that to convey that I had some basic knowledge about the affairs of New York City. And when representatives of the city banks, the banks that lent money to the city, came to see the New York congressional delegation to tell them how bad things were, nobody knew in Congress how bad things actually were. And the representative of Citibank came and said, we're no longer going to lend money to New York City. And it was a shock. Became widely known. I thought I would run for mayor. This was in 1973. But I couldn't raise the money to do it. And so I did not run for mayor. The person who became mayor was A. Beam. And A. Beam had been the controller of the city of New York. Everyone thought that he knew what he was doing in that capacity. It turns out he really was over his head, didn't really understand what was happening as it was happening. And in 1977, 4 years later, things had gotten far worse. The efforts of Mayor Beam to deal with the problem had failed. He had decided that he would adopt the plan of Felix Rohatyn, who was a financial wizard and was assisting the governor, Hugh Carey, all trying to help New York City. And the original plan, which required Congress to pass a law, was to lend money to New York City every year to pay its bills, which it would repay before the end of the year. And the assurance that the federal government had that it would do it was that the federal government could stop other payments that the federal government makes to the city and withhold them if the city didn't repay the loans. But simply repaying loans doesn't help if you still have, as the city then did, $6 billion in unpaid loans out there. The money borrowed from the federal government was just to pay current payments to municipal employees for supplies or whatever the city was involved with in providing services. And so now, 77, the city is in the most precarious position, and it looks as though bankruptcy was going to happen. And the state of New York said that it would pass a law, which it did, that the city, in its next 4-year administration, would have to balance the budget or the state would take it over. And the state put in a financial control board that had power over the city. That power relating to the budget. It could reject a city's budget if it determined it was not properly balanced. It could reject contracts that the city entered into with its union labor people and say we're not accepting them because they're too high in money or pensions. And so now a number of people decided to run. I decided to run as well. The ones, in addition, were very well known, far more well known than I am, or was at that time. Mario Cuomo, who was the Attorney General, or no, he was the Secretary of State. Bella Abzug, who was very well known. Abe Beame was running again. Herman Badillo, who is widely known in the Hispanic community and a congressman. So these people and others were running, 7 in all, and I won. Most people didn't think I could win. They thought that either Abe Beame would win or Mario Cuomo would win. And the reason I won, and I did not have supporting me the usual forces that support a successful mayoral candidate. Those forces are the municipal unions, who provide money and workers, the developers, real estate developers, who provide basically money, and the banks who provide money. And I didn't have any of them. They didn't support me. They supported either Abe Beame or Mario Cuomo. And I won. Now, why did I win? I won because I convinced the people of the city of New York in my campaign, which was a television campaign primarily, run by a very smart guy called David Garth. And we spent $2 million in the whole campaign, $2,200,000, which is a very small amount today, but in those days it was a large amount. And in the primary, everybody got relatively the same small amount. I got, I think it was 21% of the Democratic primary vote, and then Mario Cuomo was the next one up. He got 20%, and then Bella Abzug 19%. It was just 1 percentage separation, very narrow. And then we had a runoff in 10 days. And in the runoff, I beat Mario Cuomo, just the two of us. And when I defeated him, I entered the office unencumbered with the usual promises that a successful mayor has made to the municipal workforce that supported him normally, to the banks, to the real estate developers. I had made no promises to anybody except the people. That has rarely happened. And I said to myself, this is a very difficult matter, and I don't know whether I have the abilities to do it, but the people of the city of New York think I have the ability, and they elected me over the other 6. So all I can do is my best and promise the people of the city of New York that I have no other agenda other than to save the city. And as a result of that, I was able to do things that those who were encumbered by commitments to the usual forces couldn't have done. When I won the election, the leader of the municipal unions asked if he could bring in the union leaders to see me. I said, sure. And they came in, there were about 25 of them. In those days, the people knew the names of the union leaders. Today they don't. The power has kind of changed. And the leader got up and said, Mr. Mayor, we want you to know that we are your partners. And I got up and I said, no, you're not. I won the election, not you. Sometimes we'll be partners in particular matters, working together, and sometimes we'll be at odds and adversaries. And there was a sort of a hush in the room, because no mayor had ever spoken that way to union leaders before. And I mention that incident because that was my effort to establish that I was not their creature, that they were not going to be running the city the way they had in the past, union leaders and banks and real estate developers who in the past ran the city. Now, what did I do? I brought in the smartest people I knew without regard to party affiliation. I asked Felix Roden to join me again because he was extraordinarily brilliant in economics. And he came up with a new plan. And the new plan was that we would have to straighten out our unpaid bills. And the way to do that was to sell. You have to have a general obligation bond to sell for capital purposes, to build and create your infrastructure. And nobody was going to buy our bonds because they had no rating, no market rating. So the Roden plan was that the unions would buy them, but they could only buy them if there was a guarantee that if the city went into bankruptcy, that somehow or other they would be bailed out by the federal government, which had never been done before. And Roden's plan was that the federal government would guarantee the unions that if they invested in the city's bonds, that if the city did in fact go what we call belly up, bankrupt, that the federal government would bail them out and pay them. And why did the government do that? And this is where I'm particularly proud. Tip O'Neill, who was the Speaker of the House of Representatives, now dead, was quoted in the New York Times several times as saying the reason that the Congress passed the legislation allowing the bailout was because they wanted their colleague, Ed Koch, me, to succeed. If it had been somebody else, they probably wouldn't have voted for it. So that was another kind of essential, that I had been in the Congress for 9 years and had made a lot of friends. From that point on, what I did was to say to our people, and I brought in the best people for deputy mayors and commissioners, I said to them, we're going to do only that which will be on the merits. There are no politics anymore. We don't have the time or the money for it. And I believe we, in fact, did exactly that, ran the government on the merits. So what did that mean? That meant that there's a $6 billion deficit out there from prior borrowings by the city, beginning with Mayor Lindsay, Mayor Wagner, Mayor Beam. And the city's revenues are not enough to pay for the services that we're providing. And we are, in fact, borrowing money to provide services, which is what we call a no-no. You don't borrow money to pay for current services. You borrow money to build things, infrastructure. But we were allowed to borrow money to provide for services under the state law, providing that at the end of 4 years, we had a true balanced budget. So that meant that while we were borrowing less than what the prior administrations were borrowing, and each year we would be cutting services.
Which one?
Well, which services?
Yes.
Across the board. For example, A-Beam had already been compelled to reduce the workforce by 60,000 people before I became mayor. We reduced the workforce further. We, in most cases, by attrition. We didn't fill the vacancies. The usual rate of vacancy was about 8% would leave or die, municipal workers. We had about 300,000 municipal workers for the city of New York. 7 million people living here. And we reduced the budget each year. One illustration would be with cops. When I came into office, we had about 26,000 cops from a high of about 33,000, and they went further down, primarily by attrition, to 22,000. Yeah.
Okay, now, this was one operation, but you also worked on improving services, infrastructure. How did you basically manage this operation?
I believed in allowing commissioners to do what they knew and did best, which is to perform with the expertise in their area. I didn't have the expertise to perform what they could perform. I said to them, I want you not to be afraid to engage in innovation, new initiatives, and if it doesn't turn out, but what you did was common sense, I will stand with you. I won't attack you. I won't fire you. If what you did was stupid and lacked common sense, I will fire you. I gave them a sense of strength, that they weren't worried. Because the press in New York City is a very difficult press, constantly attacking. And I would stand with the commissioner in what we call the blue room where we hold the press conferences. And I would take the blows rather than the weaker commissioner if I believed in that commissioner. And so while we were reducing services, we were also improving services based on the expertise of the particular commissioner, how good
and
they
it
were.
worked. It
Yeah,
worked.
and it worked.
Also, this links to the next question, which is basic about loyalty. How do you really build this loyalty with
think-
your people?
Well, extremely important is the loyalty, but loyalty goes both ways. And if you want loyalty from your deputy mayors and your commissioners, you have to give them loyalty and support in exchange. And I ran an administration where people could come to see me without appointments in government. They could practically walk into my office without prior notice, and everybody knew that. In the beginning, I required every commissioner to provide me every 2 weeks with a statement on their successes and failures so that I would be able to know what they were doing, and it had to be limited to no more than 3 pages so I can read it. I read every one of them and I answered every one of them. So with either praise or criticism or suggestions. So they knew that there was a bond and that they could get to me. It was very important for them. And I think it worked. Shortly after we did that, my people said every 2 weeks is too quick. They're all working on the report. So make it every month. So we changed it every month.
Good. Let's go now. Excuse me, to the third question, which is here. Would you like to give us your opinion?
Have you ever been there? I have never been to Naples, but I can. No, I'm not sure about that because I've been to Italy a number of times, and I have been to. Is it Herculaneum?
Yes, yes.
Isn't that outside Naples?
Very outside, right?
So I think I was Naples, and the people in my congressional district, I was a congressman for 9 years, who live in a large part of my congressional district are Italians, and mostly from southern Italy and mostly from Naples, and they supported me. So I have lots of good friends down there. So I did go. Italy is just extraordinary. Wonderful, beautiful place.
If we can make this comparison, which advice would you give to the next mayor of Naples to move the city forward based on what you read from the press, what we talked about today, and your information gathered from the media?
The advice I would give any mayor, whether it was the mayor of Naples, Italy, or the mayor of Naples, Florida, is you have to convince your constituents, the people who live in the city, that you're totally on their side, that you have no other agenda, and that you're not afraid, and that you can get a better job if they throw you out. I used to say to people at meetings, if you decide, because of how tough it is, what I'm doing to save the city, and you all got together, you could throw me out the next election. But if you do, I'll get a better job, and you won't get a better mayor. And they agreed.
That's right.
And I was, the first time I was elected, in the general election, I got 50% against all the parties. There were 4 parties. In the re-election in 1981, I got 75%, and in the third election in 1985, I got 78%. It's the highest that any mayor has ever gotten. When I ran for a fourth term, I only got 42%, and I lost to David Dinkins, who became the first African American mayor, and it was because 6 weeks before the election, a young black male was killed in a racial killing, and that angered the black and other minority communities who in the past had split their votes, not working together as a single entity, and this united them, and they beat me. And I supported David Dinkins when he ran then against Rudy Giuliani, who was the Republican, and he wouldn't have won without me because his vote fell. And then he had problems, so he was only a one-term mayor.
Well, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Was it helpful?
It was a tremendously helpful and very valid interview. Grazie, Norberto, a te la linea. It was remarkable. It was a lesson of city politics and leadership.
Thank you.
Very interesting. The part